Welcome to South Seas ABE, and this is the Cyber War in Perspective, Analysis from the Crisis in Ukraine, being presented by Kenneth Geers. Last few notes. This is the last talk of the day, obviously. There is the business hall. You'll be able to go there tomorrow for all the great vendor stuff that's happening. And then also this evening from 5:30 until 7 o'clock is the welcome reception, also there in the business hall, downstairs in Bayside AB. The Black Hat Arsenal, I believe, closes in about a half an hour, but I should be open all day tomorrow as well, so definitely check that out in the Palm Foyer. And finally, this evening at 6:30 in Mandalay Bay BCD, which is just down the hall, are the Pony Awards. So with that, let's go right into the talk. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. So I'm Kenneth Geers. I'm with Komodo, and I've been living for the last 2 years in Ukraine. So I got together with NATO to put together a book on the crisis there, specifically the cyber dimension. This slide, I think, is important in the age of information operations in cyberspace, because it's funny how, I guess, easy it is to deny something. You know, Russia has denied that those are its tanks in eastern Ukraine, or that its malicious code is on the DNC server. In this case, you can see that a lot of people showed up for this event, and it looks pretty much like a revolution, I would say, if you get that many folks together. Now, in their pockets, all of these people have a cell phone today. These are not lighters, and this is not a Journey concert. And the thing is all of these are basically small supercomputers, right? That can be targeted for, the three basic forms of cyber attack, right? Reading your stuff, stopping you from reading your stuff, or changing your stuff, right? Because we all basically are looking at this little device all day, and we're using it not only to show that we're participating in a revolution, but we use it to get information from our friends and our government. Now, during Maidan, also on the street, the attacks were targeted enough that people on different streets got different messages. You're getting too close to the presidential palace, etc. So the Russian reaction to this, if you can see the map, you can see how important Ukraine is in geopolitics, right? If you're sitting in Moscow, it is a very important piece. Putin himself is called Kiev, the mother of all Russian cities. And you probably don't need to think much more to see how important it is from the Russian perspective. And you can see in the middle, that's the eastern part of Ukraine that is now divided up with tanks, soldiers, and also information operations in cyberspace. So this is the NATO Cyber Center. If you haven't been there, I've been associated with it since well before its beginning. I moved to Estonia in 2007 to help put together the Cyber Center, actually in which my move coincided with the cyber attacks of 2007, actually, that took place there, that were a broad denial of service against the country, and one of the first sort of uses of cyber warfare, let's say, tactics for international coercion between nation states. So what we wanted to do is think about, well, this current conflict in Ukraine, it has clearly there's a hot war on the ground. You have two countries that have expertise in information technology and expertise in hacking. So is there a cyber dimension, and if so, what is it? There's a lot of open questions. Does cyber war even exist? And if so, how do we manage it? That's the international norms part. Which is really important, particularly since hacking is not really something you can do overnight. And so that means militaries are kind of faced with the uncomfortable task of hacking a lot in peacetime in order to get ready for theoretical wars that may never happen. right? So think you're, Colonel so-and-so, and you're responsible for, for making sure that the adversary doesn't surprise you, or that you can take down the adversary in some possible war. That's your challenge, and there's going to be a lot of hacking involved, because that's what people do, whether you're a student or a professor or a soldier or a spy today, right? So here is the Warsaw Communique just from last month, right? There was a big NATO summit, I don't know if you saw this in the news, in Poland. And basically they adopted the notion, just as has the United States and many other countries, that cyberspace is a domain of warfare. You may agree with that, disagree with it, but it doesn't really matter. Basically the world's most powerful military alliance got together and said it is so, right? So you can see clear, as harmful as conventional attack, this will be a core task, and this is a domain of ours. And you can see how big the space is and how many countries are involved. So if you were in charge of that huge space of defending it against an adversary, you can imagine the kinds of things the kinds of briefings you're getting and the kinds of planning sessions you're having. It's going to be big. So there are a lot of cyber war skeptics out there, and that's fine. That's a good thing. But so I thought, well, I would just go back to kind of some basic literature. And I did this for actually numerous countries. And I just decided to pick out the U.S. Army manual because it just may be the most relevant to the audience here. And also, I was in the U.S. Army. 1993, I went into signals intelligence school, et cetera, et cetera. So these are direct quotes from FM. If you're from the Army, you'll recognize the FMs. 338 from 2014. So you can see that from a military perspective, the idea is to use cyberspace to project power, to not only take on the enemy, but the adversary. And that word is a little bit more vague, and that also is interesting because with hacking, you're going to have to hack your way through a lot of civilian infrastructure, a lot of third-party countries, in order to get to your target, right? So it's possible to cause physical damage, and it's not just tangible, but it's more intangible in the sense of who you're going after and what you're going after. So not only a thing like a network or router or something, but a cyber persona that may be, in different websites, in different servers, in different parts of the world. This makes the challenge, of course, very interesting from an attacker or defender's perspective. And within public infrastructure, right? So it's possible that the military attacks will take place in an environment where hospitals and schools and government services may be affected. Now, on the Russian side of things, since we're going to talk a little bit about Russia in this presentation, it's important to and this could be from any country's perspective, right? That computer network operations, they're just a piece in a larger puzzle. Right? The way it works in Washington, a lot of you, I'm sure, are also from Washington, you have these things called national security requirements. And they come from the White House. And the White House says, today, Syria is important to us, Russia is important to us, the South China Sea is important to us. And these things filter down into agencies, right? And they put them in their own language and use their own means and methods to get this information. Or to do something relative to that national security requirement. And so Russian SIGINT, if you know this story, some of you I'm sure do, but it's the Great Seal that was given by school children to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow on August the 4th, in 1945. So this is before the end of the war. And this is a phenomenal piece of technology. Right? So the ambassador was so proud of this, he put it above his desk. It sat there for years. And it was so sophisticated, even from 1945, that the Russian intelligence could remotely turn it on and listen to all the conversations in the ambassador's office, right? Did so for years. So there's Russian planes and trawlers and of course first-class militaries, they all have these, as well as if you've read any of the latest books on cyber espionage, you'll see that there is a healthy human aspect to computer network operations, right? You may have a network that is air-gapped, or you may have a network that we don't know anything about, let's say, and there's going to be interplay then between SIGINT and HUMINT, right? You have to send somebody across a border to a conference in a building. There's probably, I don't know how many people in this room right now that are basically going to go back and they're going to write a report that's going to go into a classified stream to their government. So here's the authors we had in the book. You'll see there's some really great thinkers on here from Libicki, Beitlik, Lewis. I'm going to highlight just two because this is a short presentation. Two Ukrainian guys, the chief of CERT-UA and Isaka Kiev. Just in a couple of slides before we move on, but just to give you a taste of what's in the book. And the book is free by chapter or the whole book. And also the NATO Cyber Center library also. If you miss this link, let's say, you can always just think, oh, there's a NATO Cyber Center in Estonia, and now we have hundreds of reports and books and publications there. So the chief of CERT-UA basically made the case that as geopolitical tension rose in the country, so did the volume and sophistication of cyber attacks. Right? And so this is not surprising, I think. If you're the president or you're a general and you're about to go to war, well, you're going to start levying these security requirements on your people, right? And they're going to start doing them, right? Back to what I was saying earlier, once these agencies get all these requirements, they're going to fulfill them, but in the various ways, one of those ways will be a computer network operation of some sort, even if it's just open source research via Google. But of course, a lot of agencies, they have more leeway than that in terms of what they do. So there's defacements, and as the conflict worsened in 2013, it goes from hacktivism to professional computer network espionage. And then when it got cranked up in 2014, that was the most intense period, there's a lot of doxing of the government. Right, in terms of trying to embarrass, in terms of trying to influence the United States, NATO, international partners. And then the final one, we'll spend one slide on that. The most advanced hack that the CERT-UA responded to was against their national election. Okay, the chief of Isaka Kiev also is really a great guy. Knows a lot about history as well as system administration. Basically, he broke it down into phases of the Euromaidan, the revolution in Kiev, the annexation of Crimea, and then the ongoing occupation in eastern Ukraine. And says basically you can find attacks in physical and software-based. And again, the most serious things that he saw were when the shooting started. So something like close to 200 people were either killed or missing off the square there that we saw in the first slide. In terms of military, you can see special forces operations, actually. So not only severing cables, but between Crimea and Ukraine in order to isolate political leadership for what's happening in the military terrain. Also, softer things like mass changes to Wikipedia relative to what was happening in Crimea. And going into actually control centers and taking over a satellite, right? So this is not anything that normal hackers typically do. So I'm going to go through some of the big events that happened during the course of the conflict, just so you can see that there's a bureaucratic nature to hacking, and that's when you kind of know it's an APT, right? If it's not something that happens once, well, then you really don't know. But if it's something that comes again and again over time, well, then you know there's probably some kind of an intelligence bureaucracy behind this. So this was an interplay. Again, I want to speak to a continuum here of cyber and real-world stuff, and things are going to go back and forth all the time and increasingly in the future. And then if you've seen Ghost in the Shell, right, by 2029, you can't even tell the difference between the two anymore. So that's probably where we're going. But in this case, so this was signals intelligence snatching sort of two U.S. diplomats, their communications off, POTS or plain old telephone system of some sort, right, cell phone, and then basically uploading this to YouTube and announcing it on Twitter, right? And this was embarrassing. If you remember, there were some not nice things said about other countries, and basically a very frank discussion between two seasoned diplomats. But the intent of whoever snatched this information and released it into social media was to embarrass the United States and create divisions between Ukraine and Western Europe. So here is the election hack that the chapter by the CERT chief goes into in some detail, but here's basically the highlights. And again, you can see that this is not something that a lone hacker would probably be capable of. But there was a serious reconnaissance and admin access, possible 0-day. And then, once they're in the system, and so they can manipulate the system at will according to who wins. Now, there are paper ballots, right, of course, in Ukraine, and skeptics would say, well, the hackers couldn't change the result of the election. And that's true, but there's also an integrity issue. And there's the issue of trying to influence an election perhaps before the election's over, such that you can tip it one way or another. And when it comes down to as so many elections do, to 51 to 49%, then you think, well, maybe I could, as a hacker, influence this thing. And finally, as soon as the elections were announced on the election website, and somebody who got very, very few votes actually was announced the winner. It was the far-right candidate, right? And this is what Russia tries to build up in Ukraine, that it's a government of Nazis and fascists. It was immediately broadcast on Russian television, right? So this is the kind of coordinated campaign. So here's the electricity grid attack of Christmas. And as you've probably seen, this also is an attack that requires time and effort and a team mission-oriented approach, right? So, it's from the spear phishing to the backdoor, disabling backup power, telephone denial of service against the call centers. So this is a logic bomb as well to start wiping computers like 45 minutes into the affair. So this is something that takes time and effort to do. And the CERT chief basically said this is the most, during his tenure at the CERT, was the most sophisticated attack that he had seen. And some of the analysis that's out there basically says the same thing in that it's not just the malware, but it's the intent, it's the timing, it's the creativity, it's the effort, the overall effort involved. So in terms of infrastructure, of course, there's a lot of interesting things that happen. Everything's connected now, even billboards. So this is in St. Petersburg, Russia. So smart TVs in Ukraine were hacked, right, to display Russian propaganda. And the billboard, this one, in St. Petersburg, Russia, was hacked to display Ukrainian propaganda. So if you don't speak Russian, this is, please forgive us, Ukraine, for having attacked you. Now, there's again this interplay between cyber and non-cyber, or whatever you want to call it. But now all of us, this is one of the things I want to impress upon everyone in this room. You probably already know it, but we are all now intelligence analysts, right? Because you have a computer with an internet connection, you have, in real sense, you have as much access to information as President Obama does, right? So the NSA and the CIA, they've got certain compartmentalized things that give specific tactical updates, but the big picture issues, honestly, NSA and CIA don't know any more than does the New York Times and The Economist, right? Or do you, if you're a good researcher? So here, what we can see is that researchers, they're putting together photographs of tanks from the World Wide Web that the photographs basically locate them in Russia and locate them in Ukraine. So if Moscow says we have not invaded Ukraine, or as Donald Trump said the other day, Russia is not going to invade Ukraine, you can prove it, right? At least to the extent of putting together this research and citing your sources and making your case. If you haven't seen this, you should see it on Vice News. This is a tremendous story. This reporter on the right basically follows a Russian soldier all the way from the Chinese border, from his home to his training camp in Russia, to crossing the border into Ukraine, and to this is a small town in Ukraine where he basically was involved in military operations. So this is tremendous. He probably takes at least a dozen pictures following this soldier all the way from his base all the way back to his home in eastern Russia. Social media as well, be aware, when I ask my students in Kiev, so I teach a class at the university in Kiev, do they see reflections of information operations within their social media space? Immediately every hand is raised. And this is a famous case in which there was a fire in Odessa, which is on the southern coast of Ukraine. And immediately there was a lot of political conflict around this fire because people died, right? And so this guy, Igor Rozovsky, basically said, I'm a doctor trying to help people, but the government won't let me. All these people are dying around me, et cetera, et cetera. And he's calling them fascists, which is a real key word in this part of the world, right? Where World War II, at least from a Russian perspective, is rightfully so, the biggest moment perhaps in most of living memory, let's say. So, but as researchers try and see who this guy is, it turns out that there is no such person, and the Facebook account had just been created, and the picture was from a dentist in some other part of Russia. Right? So what does that mean? This is an information operation that is maybe tactical and certainly not decisive in any kind of war scenario, but it depends. I mean, if you have a large effort, moving things forward on many different fronts, then you have some kind of a cyber war element to what is happening in international relations and international conflict. So I live in this neighborhood. I don't know if you saw this. This was just a couple of weeks ago, but it was a prominent Belarusian journalist who moved to Moscow because he was afraid of what was happening in Belarus, and then he moved to Ukraine because he felt too much pressure in Russia. And so this is my neighborhood. I eat just to the left of this, and my daughter basically takes dance just behind this event. But he was at his girlfriend's house a couple of weeks ago, and he got up in the morning, and he was driving and just past McDonald's here on the right, and his car blows up. Right? So this is still a part of the world where he is not alone. There are many journalists, and there's serious human rights implications for everything. And so including being an online journalist. So in the whole debate over Big Brother and in surveillance and all this stuff, it's really important to appreciate where you live if it's a relatively open, free society, but also remember that it's a big world and that it's really important, I think, to kind of limit the power of government in cyberspace, because there are plenty of governments who will abuse it without hesitation. So cyber war in perspective, I would say that there is some kind of a continuum, and it's hard to put your finger on it. It's going to be moving quickly, between, that's where, you remember, I'm sure some of you do in this audience, the JTF CND that then moved to CNO, then greater autonomy. It's basically when you're doing cyber defense, there's an active defense piece, and you're going to be basically doing a lot of things that might be offensive in nature. I mean, there was just in this morning an article in the paper, and basically the CIA official who's speaking in Aspen at their security conference said, well, we've got to get the guys before they get to CIA. So that's why a lot of our counter cyber efforts are involved in getting in these groups and seeing what they're going to do before they do it. So let's look at this, speaking of CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So in Estonia in 2007, you could say that this was an availability issue, right? It was a massive DDoS, sort of broadside against the country. In Ukraine, I think there's a lot of integrity issues. Think about the information operations and social media and the replacing of the firmware, right? And the election results. Right? These are things we need to think about in the context of the DNC hack as well, right? It's protecting the democratic process itself, and how do you do that? It's kind of amorphous, but this, the e-voting, how do you protect maybe candidates and parties against foreign manipulation? This is not easy, and of course, when you start doing that, then a lot of people are going to raise their hand and say, government, get out. So it's not, basically it's a big challenge. And of course, down at USA 2016, it's a confidentiality issue, right? We never thought that WikiLeaks might be used for such a politically pointed purpose. But if you think about it, all you have to do is really time it well. So that's one of the things about the DNC hack. They were saying that this looks like a bureaucracy because they're leaking this information just prior to the Democratic convention. So I'm involved in another book project at Cybercom, and we're looking at grand strategy in cyberspace. And, you know, what can I say about cyber war? To me, there's no question it exists. Whether or not it's rises to the level of some, you know, the weapon of mass disruption, let's say, is another question. It's probably not decisive, right? But think about it. If you're a tank commander, you know, and this is an important day for you, but the enemy has some kind of a 0 day for an operating system or application upon which you are dependent, it may be a very long day on the battlefield, right? And all these, basically, tanks, planes, and ships, they're all basically floating, flying, and rolling computers today, right? So you have to be aware of that, and you think the Departments of Defense around the world are absolutely aware of that. If your operating system is down or this critical application doesn't function properly, you might not have a win on the battlefield that day. That said, Admiral Yamamoto did not intend on winning World War II at Pearl Harbor, right? That was just the opening shot in what would be a long war, and they expected a very severe response from the United States. So it was to gain time, to gain space. And that's probably precisely the same way that cyber attacks would be used by militaries. You know, cyber attacks are not going to occupy ground, you know, in Germany or Russia or the United States, but they might facilitate, right? They might help. So turn out the lights for a while, confuse leadership, just like in the Army FM. That's exactly what it said. You can attack systems. You can also attack the decision-making process. So there's too many national security challenges, I think, to think about, and some of them are going to lead us toward solutions that will be unhelpful, both for the internet and for cyberspace and for human rights, I think. But here's just some of them. Relative to attack, what can you do in peacetime? Right? I'm also on this Tallinn Manual team in Estonia, so we're looking at how the laws of war apply in cyberspace. What can you and can't you attack? You know, because again, you're going to have to be busy in peacetime if you want to be successful in wartime. So that makes deterrence very difficult. So one of the aspects of deterrence is that you have to have a clearly stated policy of deterrence and a demonstration of capability to enforce whatever policy against the adversary. And this is very difficult in cyberspace because things are so elusive, right? I mean, how many years and millions of dollars did the US go after Moonlight Maze for a big question mark at the end? Who was it? Well, we think it was the Russians, but may not be. Maybe some other sophisticated actor routing through Moscow. So, you know, the attribution question is very interesting. Can you get solid attribution? Can you get to the person at the keyboard? Yeah, sometimes, but you might need traditional law enforcement, you might need human, etc. But one of the interesting things about that, and this is what maybe Russia is finding out today, is you can crowdsource this as well. If Putin or Obama or some other leader really pisses off everyone in this room, well, guess what? You might do attribution pretty quickly just by good open source analysis and perhaps some hacking as well. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Enjoy your evening.